What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette, and in this week's episode, obviously I'm going to be breaking down the Week 3 action, taking a look ahead to Week 4, and giving some of my thoughts from a week that really delivered a bit more drama than we expected. Going in without a single ranked matchup, I think a lot of us looking in, a lot of college football fans expected it to be a fairly lackluster week, limited drama, and that's kind of the best thing about college football. Those are often the weeks when the most exciting things happen, from the start of the day, Missouri getting a really good home win to stay unbeaten and knock off the reigning Big 12 champions, Kansas State, and give them number 15 in the nation, their first loss of the season, all the way to Colorado holding on for a surprisingly close but stunning and exciting win over Colorado State, and albeit against a Colorado State team that is coming off of a 3-9 season, so it's a good thing for the Buffaloes that they were able to hold on, shows resiliency, but at the same time, they're going to have to fix some things going up against really this coming week against Oregon, and then the following week against USC, and then when they get into the back half of their season as well in a very competitive Pac-12. But I'm going to be going through through the top 25, making some quick observations on a few teams. I'm not going to touch on every single team in this video, but I'm going to start with the Georgia Bulldogs. And the Bulldogs were in a bit of trouble, really, at halftime against South Carolina. The Gamecocks' defense played really strong. Carson Beck was maybe showing some of those things of being a new starter at quarterback. And the Gamecocks defense really stepped up to the plate and delivered a just really impressive first half of football. I'm not sure about the yardage. I'll pop up that number if I could find it in post, but I know they were held to 3 points. The Gamecocks went ahead 14-3, and then it was kind of a tale of two halves. In the second half, then the Georgia defense is the side of the ball that stepped up, and they held South Carolina really in check the rest of the way and were able to score, I think, 21 unanswered to come away with a win. So the Bulldogs get a win. South Carolina is a tough team. I think they're going to give plenty of teams some troubles. They had a really strong finish to the year last year with wins over Tennessee and Clemson, and I think they'll be competitive for that number 2 spot in the SEC East, which I think is really up in the air. And that's even more so because of the Florida Gators win over Tennessee. The Gators in that game, Trevor Etienne had a huge game on the ground, was consistently gashing the Volunteers defense, picking up a lot of yardage, really building on what the defense was able to do as well. Strong effort by the Gators defense, shutting down Joe Milton and the Tennessee offense. So built on that momentum, obviously being in the swamp, a lot surrounding that, the noise that comes with that, and just the more plays that pile up, obviously the more momentum you're going to get, and the more you're going to get that crowd behind you. And the swamp is one of the top places for that. And so the Gators come away with a big win, and I think they put themselves in a good position to compete for the SEC East. Do I think that they finish, with a chance to potentially beat Georgia? Maybe not, but Georgia looked beatable on Saturday, and they certainly have a lot that they're replacing from last year. They're the back-to-back defending national champions still, though, and I know they have very high expectations to continue with another national championship this year. And so I think the SEC East, though, you've got a Kentucky team that always seems to be a little under the radar. I think they've really had a tough opponent yet, but they're 3-0. They'll have a chance to compete in that division. South Carolina is probably, again, they're a team that's going to give teams issues, but I don't know if they will have what it takes to pull out the wins when they need to. We've already seen them lose to North Carolina and Georgia, 2 good teams, but in that SEC East, I think it's obviously the Bulldogs' division to lose, and I think between Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, maybe still Tennessee, kind of competing for that second spot. And again, there's not really much to it, though, unless one of those teams can rise above the rest. And I guess even Missouri, after their win over Kansas State, is a team that can do that. A really exciting ending to that one, a 61-yard field goal for the Tigers to beat the Wildcats. But I think the SEC East, if one of those teams can kind of separate themselves from the pack and get to their matchup with Georgia undefeated or at least with one loss, and then who knows, maybe they could stun the Bulldogs. I think, though, the SEC East it's Georgia, and then it's everybody else. And I think it'll be exciting to keep an eye on that division, though, to say the least. And so then going through a little bit more of the rankings, on the flip side, in the SEC West, Alabama had a really slow start. They're still really trying to figure out things at quarterback. I think maybe the move is to go back to Milroe. Maybe it's to try, another guy we haven't seen yet. But I think the Crimson Tide definitely have things to address on offense. Their defense played well, albeit against a South Florida team that isn't going to put up crazy numbers or anything like that, or that isn't going to really give teams fits too much, especially a team of Alabama's caliber. But the Crimson Tide continue to struggle. It's, with a Nick Saban coach team, you trust them to kind of eventually turn it around, but it does leave me wondering if we might be coming to the end of the Nick Saban tenure at Alabama. And what a tenure it's been. That's something I will dive into eventually in probably another video, especially whenever that time does come, that it looks like it's Saban's time to retire. And I don't think it's time to start ringing the bells for that yet this season. But it does just seem like it's closer than it has in previous years. So then a couple of the other top teams, you've got Michigan. They struggled in the first half offensively. J.J. McCarthy threw 3 interceptions against Bowling Green. I think they're only up 14-6 at halftime. They end up getting a couple touchdowns in the second half to kind of pull away, but some issues there. Similarly, Texas against Wyoming. I think that game was tied at 10 heading into the fourth quarter. The Wyoming defense was able to limit the Longhorns, but again, some late touchdowns. I think a big interception late carried Texas to a win as well. Florida State, also at Boston College, the Seminoles Jordan Travis had a clean game in the aspect that he didn't get intercepted. He completed, I think, 2/3 of his passes, somewhere around there, and threw for about 200 some yards and about 2 touchdowns. But Keon Coleman was really a non-factor on offense. He had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 targets, 0 receptions. He had a fumble on a punt return. So it'd be interesting to keep an eye on him when he's really the priority in a defense, which is what I would imagine he was in the Eagles' game plan. A few other guys stepped up, though. Johnny Wilson, I think, caught up for over 100 yards receiving. USC was off this week. Ohio State named their starter. Kyle McCord is the Buckeyes' starter at quarterback going forward. And maybe it was the assurance. Maybe it's playing against a Western Kentucky team that isn't going to stay in the game for very long. But McCord had a really good game. Of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. had a good game, and the running backs did well as the Buckeyes piled up 63 points. And I think it's also a good sign for the defense. Again, Western Kentucky isn't at that big, Power 5 caliber, but they're one of the best passing offenses in the nation regardless. And the Buckeyes defense was able to limit that for really most of the game. The Hilltoppers only got 10 points. I'll pop up the yardage here as well. But overall, good win for the Buckeyes. And then, kind of going through some of the other storylines quickly, got Colorado holding on late against Colorado State. It's, that game was definitely a dirty game in a lot of aspects, kind of on both sides. There was a lot of heat going into it, a lot of talk, back and forth even before the game. And then kind of the headhunting, though, is an issue that seemed to be there. And I know, Colorado State fans and coaches and players would say that's not what they intended. But, the hit on Travis Hunter that knocked him out of the game and appears to have him out for, I think, 2 to 3 weeks now. And even there was kind of, I think, a late hit or a heavy hit kind of driven into the ground, which that one was not as much, to me, like explicitly aggressive and over the top, was when Shedeur Sanders was kind of driven into the ground by a Colorado State defender. But it is something to keep an eye on. Those two will be a priority on the offensive side of the ball for opposing defenses, and obviously especially Travis Hunter, because if you can impact his play on either side of the ball, he's just such a dynamic player that taking him out of the game is something that should not be done, but it can affect how the game goes. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on, is his health as well moving forward, and how the Buffaloes are able to respond going into Oregon. And speaking of the Pac-12, Oregon, comfortable win over, I think, Hawaii this week. And then Washington, Michael Penix Jr. had just an incredible, I think through 3 quarters, he had like 473 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. I said this kind of after week 1, after he took apart the Boise State defense, but he is legitimately almost into the front runner thing. I think that'll still be Caleb Williams, but that second place spot right now in the Heisman kind of hierarchy right now, I think Penix is deserving of that spot. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. Washington, especially in the back half of the season in this Pac-12 conference, is going to have a lot of tough games, and the Pac-12 is going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. I think even if Coach Prime hadn't come to Colorado, there is so much talent and depth at, from like 1 through like 6 or 7 in the Pac-12, and adding Colorado into that mix just makes it a really exciting conference to watch. And it really is. I mean, it is sad that it is the last year in its current form. We'll see if Oregon State and Washington State are able to pull some teams from the Mountain West or maybe somewhere else, or even just kind of have a smaller conference that we aren't really used to seeing. Be interesting to keep an eye on that. But trying to think now if there's any other thoughts or takeaways from week 3. Notre Dame is going into a big matchup against Ohio State, and I guess with that I'm going to shift focus into looking at week 4. And there's a few good matchups. You've got UCLA against Utah. Both teams are 3-0, kind of getting that Pac-12 slate started. Those are a couple of teams that, I feel like a lot of times I've talked about USC, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, obviously, but Utah and UCLA, Utah is still the back-to-back Pac-12 reigning champions. With Cam Rising healthy, or even without, they've proven that they could be a good team. They have a defense that was able to shut down Florida in that season-opening win. And I think the Utes, they'll have a tough test against UCLA, but it is a ranked matchup that I'll be keeping my eyes on. And then another one, it's in the same time window from the Pac-12, is Colorado at Oregon. I have a feeling this is where the Colorado hype train, Coach Prime hype train, kind of hits its first bump in the road. And I guess in a way they kind of did against Colorado State, but the fact that they pull out that win in just thrilling style kind of takes away from maybe some of the deficiencies that they had in that game. I think Oregon is able to take advantage of some of those. The Ducks have a good, well-rounded team. They've got a defense-minded coach in Dan Lanning, and I think that the Ducks, especially because it's at Autzen and that stadium can definitely play a pivotal role in home field advantage. I think this is where Colorado faces that first hurdle, and then it'll be really tough following that up against USC. But then also, there's a lot. The best window, you're gonna want to have your multi-view on. I've been using that with shout out YouTube TV. Not sponsored, but it really is a nice tool to have, is watching that multi-view. And that window, there's also Ole Miss at Alabama. Alabama is still trying to figure things out at quarterback. Ole Miss seems to have Hudson Card as the Jackson Dart as the quarterback, QB1 over Spencer Sanders, and they've piled up three early wins. They haven't truly been tested yet. They got a win over Georgia Tech this past weekend. But I think the Rebels have a good chance, the way that Alabama's in a little bit of, I don't want to call it a tailspin, but definitely dealing with some issues that they can definitely try to take advantage of. And then a couple of night game slots. You've got Iowa at Penn State. That should be a good game. Couple of good quarterbacks. Obviously, Cade McNamara played against Penn State, I think, during his time at Michigan. And Penn State will be tested. Drew Aller will be tested by the Iowa defense, and so that is a good matchup to keep an eye on. And then finally, the big one where College Game Day is going to be this weekend, Ohio State at Notre Dame. I think, again, it's not a high-level opponent by any means, but I think Ohio State answered a lot of the questions that they had going into Week 3 against Western Kentucky. The offense really was dynamic and dangerous and put up a lot of yards and points. Defense showed that they can defend the pass well. And I think Notre Dame, too, they still prioritize the run. It's just that they're more efficient when they do pass the ball with Sam Hartman. So that matchup, going into South Bend for a night game, I'm sure there will be a lot of energy there. I know from watching a couple of teams do this, both Georgia and Cincinnati, that it's fairly easy to take over Notre Dame Stadium. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, because I don't think any there aren't many fan bases that do that better than Ohio State. Buckeyes always travel well, always show out for the Buckeyes, and I think that, if Notre Dame can find a way to really pack those seats with, majority fighting Irish, that can play a role. I think Ohio State will be ready, though, and I think any sort of lingering doubts or questions that they had are at least something that they can be more confident about after this past week. So that's my outlook for week 4. It's going to be an exciting week. This is the first real week of really good games in terms of ranked matchups across the slate. We really have kind of been lacking in that this season, but I'm really looking forward to this week 4 slate. Let me know your thoughts on this past week about, what it says maybe about these teams, kind of going through some issues, some close games, some battles. And then, this week 4 slate, Florida State Clemson's another one that, because of Clemson's loss, has taken a step down from the pedestal that it would have been on, but another good matchup to watch. But if you've watched to this point in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. Without further ado, this is Peter Burtnett, College Football Talk, signing out. Peace.